Our first witness, our key witness in this situation is Dr. Robert McClelland. And I'm going to let Dr. Robert McClelland kind of introduce himself a little bit, but he's been the subject matter for the last 47, 48 years of tying the murder of John F. Kennedy into something that is questionable throughout the last 48 years, and it's still up in arms right now trying to figure out what's going on. And so we'd like to give Dr. McClelland a warm welcome down here for us, and so would you welcome him here? Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Robert McClelland.
You have a mic?
We don't, sir, so that's why I had to move them up.
Okay. Well, sometimes my voice gets all the way to my teeth before it disappears. So if you can't hear me, maybe you're lucky. But if you'd like to hear me, let me know from the back. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to try to divide my talk basically into two sections. One is what happened on the weekend of November 22nd, 23rd, and 24th at Parkland Hospital here in Dallas, at which time I was in my second year on the faculty at Southwestern Medical School as a professor of surgery. 2 days before that, I had just had my 34th birthday, so that kind of gives you an idea of where I am in time. And where I was in time related to that terrible weekend. At the 22nd, November the 22nd, I was in the operating room at Parkland on the second floor of Parkland, and I was showing a movie of how to repair a hiatus hernia to a group of surgery residents there in the operating room in a conference room there. When I heard a little tap on the door of the conference room, so I went to the door and looked out, and standing outside the door was Dr. Chuck Crenshaw, who was one of our senior surgery residents at Parkland. And he said, "Dr. Mack, would you step outside? I need to tell you something." So I did, went in and turned off the movie projector, stepped outside, and he said, "They've just called on the red phone in the emergency room," which they always called on, the police did, when they were bringing in some very bad accident or some problem that was really a critical situation rather than the usual emergency room visitor. So they're bringing in President Kennedy. They said that he's been shot in the midst of his motorcade downtown. And I said, "Oh my God, surely not." And with that, Dr. Crenshaw and I went to the elevator there next to the nurses station at Parkland, got on the elevator and rode 2 floors down to the emergency room, which was directly below the operating room. And as we were riding down in the elevator, I said to Chuck, trying to keep my spirits up, I said, "Well, Chuck, we often get calls like this, and it turns out it's not nearly what they were saying it was." And with that, the door of the elevator came open, and I walked around a little angle from the elevator out into a large area, probably about the size of this room. And gathered in that room was a sight I never had seen before. It was jammed with men in business suits, all wearing hats. Everybody wore a hat back in those days. And I thought, well, I've never seen anything like this. And with that, that crowd of people parted spontaneously, and I could look down, like, say, a corridor between these tables, back to the back of the room for this big area. And off of that big area, there were 4 operating rooms, what we call emergency operating rooms. Trauma room 1 and 2 were the first 2 rooms on the right and left, and trauma rooms 3 and 4 were just next to them in this hallway that continued off of this pit area. And I looked down through that corridor, and the first thing that caught my eye was Mrs. Kennedy sitting in a folding chair outside of trauma room 1 in her bloody clothing. And I thought to myself, oh my, this is exactly what they said it was on the red phone. So I walked down to where she was sitting, and as I was walking, I was thinking, I may be here at 34 years of age and a very junior surgeon. I may be the only faculty surgeon in the hospital at that time. It was noon, around noon, and my chief of surgery, Dr. Tom Shires, I knew was in Galveston at a medical meeting, so he wasn't there. There were only 2 other faculty members at that time in the surgery department. Now there are 56. But then there were only 4 of us, Dr. Shires, myself, Dr. Charles Baxter, and Dr. Malcolm Perry. And I thought as I kept on walking toward trauma room 1, well, I know Dr. Shires is gone, and probably Dr. Perry and Dr. Baxter are out somewhere at one of the hamburger places along Harry Hines having lunch there, since you wanted to avoid eating at Parkland whenever you could. And that's what I thought they had done. So anyway, I went on down to trauma room 1, walked by Mrs. Kennedy, pushed the door open, and the very first thing I saw was a very horrific sight of President Kennedy lying on a stretcher, on what we call a gurney, a wheeled stretcher, with the light shining in his face. And his face he was lifted up a little bit, something that placed under his shoulders. And I could see his bloody head. And then while I was horrified by that sight, I was at the same time gratified to see that my 2 cohorts in the surgery department, Dr. Perry and Dr. Baxter, had arrived there just right before I did. And they were beginning to place a surgical drape over his neck to explore a wound that was right here, just above the collarbone and just above the breastbone in his neck. Little wound, maybe about as big around as the end of my finger. And as I walked by on one side of the gurney, Dr. Perry reached across the gurney and handed me a surgical retractor. And he said, "Bob, would you go and stand at the head of the gurney and hold this retractor in the incision we're making here to explore this wound so that we can see better?" And so I did that. I went up and stood at the head of the gurney, leaned over President Kennedy's head, and held this retractor in the incision that was made in his neck here to explore this wound. People wondered why we were doing that, because he had what is called an endotracheal tube placed into his windpipe by Dr. Jim Carrico, who was a resident on duty in the emergency room. As soon as the president came in, he saw what had happened. He grabbed a laryngoscope and intubated his trachea and connected that to a respirator. And then he was rolled into trauma room 1. But what that was being done for was not necessarily to place a breathing tube, which was already there, but was to explore the wound to see if there were any major vessels, that is, the carotid artery or the vena, or the large vein, the jugular vein, injured. And so that's why that was being done. Also, people have said, well, wasn't he probably dead when he came in? And yes, the answer to that is. However, he was making what we call agonal attempts to breathe, and he had actually good electrocardiographic activity on the electrocardiogram monitor that was immediately placed on his chest. So with that, that's why they were doing what they were doing. And I went and stood at the head of the gurney, and immediately when I looked down at the president's head, and I was about 18 or 20 inches above the wound, I saw this massive wound in the back of his head, far back in the back of his head. And I said to Dr. Perry and Dr. Baxter, I said, "My God, did you see this wound in the back of his head?" And they said, "Well, no, we really haven't had time to examine him, and we just started doing this." I said, "Well, there's a huge wound, probably 5 or so inches in diameter on the right side of the back of his head." And so they continued what they were doing. And I was standing next to Dr. Jenkins, who was working the anesthesia and the respirator machine. And so we were both there at the head of the gurney. And that's the reason I'm pointing out that he was there, because that leads into some disagreement about what he and I saw at that point. And what I saw when I stood there for about 2 or 3 minutes is a portion of, in fact, like half, I would say, of his cerebellum which is the back part of the brain, slowly fell out of the hole in the back of his head onto the gurney. And there was a lot of discussion later as to whether that was cerebellum or whether it was cerebrum. Well, another thing that made me know that it was cerebellum, aside from the fact that it's easy to recognize as cerebellum, it's quite different looking from the cerebrum, is that when I looked down into the wound, I could see down into it and see that the back half of his right brain had actually been blown out. That is, the cerebrum was gone. Indeed, Mrs. Kennedy came in carrying a large portion of his cerebrum in her right hand that she handed to Dr. Jenkins. The reason that's a point of worth discussion is where this wound was in the back of the head. Was it on the top part of the back of the head or the back part of the back of the head? Well, I think it was in the back part of the back of the head, and the reason that's a critical thing is that it's where you would have expected an exit wound to have been if he was shot from the front by a bullet that probably went in at the hairline and came out far back in the back of the head. Whereas the pictures that are shown of Oswald's bullet striking him are in the top of his head, the back part, at the top of the back part of his head. And so it would be unlikely, with a hole that far forward, that the cerebellum would have spontaneously fallen out like that. So that's why I was making those particular points about it being cerebrum or cerebellum was in relationship with whether they may be, as I'm going to discuss a little bit later in the second part of my talk, whether there was one or more than one shooter, i.e. one shooter or probably two. And I think that there were two, as I'll discuss in a moment, although there's a lot of difference about that, and that's not the official version. Well, with that, those few asides, we completed the exploration of the neck in about 10 to 11 minutes or so. And just as Dr. Perry and Dr. Baxter were completing that exploration, Dr. Kemp Clark, who was our professor of neurosurgery, had arrived on the scene and was standing by the electrocardiographic monitor. And as they were finishing up the exploration, Dr. Clark looked at the ECG and said, "Mac, that's Dr. Perry, I think you can stop now. He's gone. His ECG just flatlined." And so with that, everybody stepped away. And most everybody who had come into the room, there were several other people who had come into the room who were starting intravenous lines and actually putting in a chest tube because there was some concern about a chest injury. Several other people in there besides the ones that I mentioned earlier, myself, Dr. Perry, and Dr. Baxter, and Dr. Jenkins, who were immediately around the president. They all left, except Dr. Baxter and I were standing in a position when that occurred, and as the crowd was leaving the room, the gurney was pushed back against the wall of Trauma Room 1 so that we were made to step back and were crowded against the wall and were the only ones left in the room. And at that point, though, when everybody had left, Dr. Baxter and I began to push the gurney away so we could walk around it and leave the room ourselves. However, before we were able to do that, the door to Trauma Room 1 opened and a priest walked in. We later found out he was Father Huber. He had been called to administer the last rites to the president. And so we would have had to push him out of the way to get out of the room, so Dr. Baxter and I just froze against the wall, although we felt very inappropriate at being there at that time, but we had no choice. So we stood there and heard the last rites of President Kennedy. And all I could hear Father Huber say when he leaned over to begin the last rites, he said, "If thou livest," after he had anointed his forehead. And I couldn't hear what he said after that, but he completed the last rites in a much lower voice. And then as he was getting through and putting everything back into the little kit that he brought in with him, the door came open to Trauma Room 1, and Mrs. Kennedy came in. She was very composed. I don't mean cold, but just very much in command. She was a real lady. There was no doubt of the quality of that lady on that day, or any other day for that matter. And she stood by the gurney next to Father Huber, who was still standing there, and I couldn't hear what she said because she spoke in such a low voice. But apparently, from the context of his answer, she asked him, first thing, had he received the last rites? And Father Huber said, yes, I've given him conditional absolution. With that, she grimaced. She didn't like that. She didn't say anything, but she obviously was concerned that he had not gotten full last rites. With that, she stood there for a moment by President Kennedy, whose face had been uncovered from the sheet when Father Huber was administering the last rites, and stood there and looked down into his face, and she exchanged rings between her finger and his finger. And then she stood there for a few moments, walked to the end of the gurney where the president's right foot was sticking out from underneath the sheet, and she stood there for a moment, leaned over, kissed his foot, and walked out the door. And that was the last thing I personally saw, and Dr. Baxter personally saw, in relation to the treatment of President Kennedy at Parkland Hospital. Now, the next little information that I'm going to give you was provided to me, not something I saw myself, but was provided to me by one of my close friends, Dr. Rose, who was our forensic pathologist at Parkland Hospital. And he had an office around near the emergency room, near where some of the pathology labs and the post-mortem rooms were. And as they were rolling President Kennedy out, who had already been placed in his coffin, there's a book, in fact, a couple of years ago, Aubrey Rake presented his experience with bringing the coffin out that they placed the president in, and he died. Mr. Rake did. Am I saying his name right?
Right, yes.
He died this year, and so he's another one of the people who was directly involved in this, who is rapidly disappearing from the scene. They placed him in a large bronze coffin in trauma room 1 and left that on the gurney, and they were rolling the gurney with the coffin on it out a long corridor to the loading dock to the ambulance where they were planning to place him and take him back to Air Force One. Well, as they were rolling that gurney down the hall with the president's coffin on it, with Mrs. Kennedy following along, and several other people, Kenny O'Donnell and Mr. Powers and some of the other people who were with the president that day following along, and there were 2 Secret Service men leading the procession, one of whom was carrying a Thompson submachine gun. And so when Dr. Rose saw this, he stepped out in front of the group and held his hand up and stopped them. And he said, I have to let you know that there's a state law that anybody who is murdered in the state of Texas has to undergo a post-mortem examination here. Well, Dr. Rose said with that, nobody said anything to him. The Secret Service man, who was not encumbered by the machine gun, walked over to Dr. Rose and placed his hands underneath his armpits, lifted him up off the ground, and set him over against the wall of the hallway and shook his finger in his face. Didn't say anything to him, but it was clear that he meant get out of the way. And with that, Secret Service men turned and they continued rolling the president out to the ambulance where he was placed and taken back to Air Force One, where I think most of you have seen pictures then of President Johnson being sworn in with Mrs. Kennedy beside him at that time. So that's what happened with President Kennedy and what we were associated with and saw directly or knew about indirectly on that November the 22nd. Now, the next day, Saturday, went by and nothing happened. And on Sunday, on the 24th of November, I was at home, and I'd been to church with my wife and 2 children, and my mother was visiting, and they were all upstairs getting ready to go out to dinner. And I was downstairs waiting for them, and I said to myself, well, I'll turn the television on and see what else has happened, if anything else is going on. And as I turned the TV on, before the picture formed, I could hear a voice saying, he's been shot, he's been shot. And I thought, now what? And then the picture formed, and there was the picture that everybody's seen reproductions of, that Oswald has just been shot and is slumped to the ground. With that, I walked to the foot of the stairway in my house and called up to my wife, and I said, I've got to go to Parkland, and they just shot Oswald, and see what I can do to help. And my wife called down and she said, who is Oswald? And I said, he's the man that they claim shot President Kennedy. Oh, she said. With that, I got in my car and sped out toward Parkland Hospital. And on my way there, I saw Dr. Shires, my chief of surgery, in his car, he had now returned from the meeting in Galveston, and he was heading down the same street I was in the opposite direction. We stopped our cars alongside one another, and he had just heard on the radio what I had just seen on television. And with that, he turned his car around, and I followed him out to Parkland. And we got there shortly after Oswald had arrived at Parkland, and they had taken him into Trauma Room 2, right across the hall from Trauma Room 1, there in the emergency room where President Kennedy had been treated. Dr. Shires and I looked in the door there and saw that there was a beehive of activity with surgical residents and nurses and other orderlies and whatnot, taking care of getting Oswald pumped full of blood and resuscitated and ready for surgery. He had been shot, and I think this is something that's sort of worth noting, because there's some fairly strong suggestion that Oswald and Ruby had known each other before. I think, is Ms. Oliver here yet?
No.
She's not going to be able, anyway, I'll mention more about that later. But he saw Ruby approaching him with a pistol. Of course, seeing anybody approach him with a pistol would make some attempt to avoid being shot. And Oswald did that, and when he did it, he sealed his doom, because if he had kept walking straight toward Ruby, the bullet would have gone straight through from the front to the back of his abdominal cavity, and probably would have injured it severely with bowel injury and whatnot, but probably would not have killed him. Instead, he turned somewhat to avoid the bullet, and the bullet, instead of going straight from the front to the back, it went across the back part of his abdomen, where it blew holes in both the aorta and the vena cava, the 2 major blood vessels in the abdominal cavity. Nevertheless, he didn't bleed out, as most people would after that, but the way the blood clot formed, he survived long enough to get to Parkland and be resuscitated. And Dr. Shires and I, as we got upstairs and changed into our scrub clothes, Oswald was, when we did that, ready in the operating room, and we went in, draped him, and Dr. Shires was the operating surgeon, and I was helping, and Dr. Perry, who was also in the hospital, was there helping, along with Dr. Ron Jones, who was one of the senior surgery residents. So there were 4 of us operating on Oswald. Dr. Shires was able to expose the area where the blood vessels were injured, and which was a pretty good feat of surgery, without causing horrendous hemorrhage, and was able to get clamps on those vessels after about 25 or 30 minutes of dissecting. And as he got the clamps on the vessels, about 5 minutes after that, as he was working further down to get them exposed to repair them, Oswald's heart, which had been damaged by all the blood loss he had, it played out, and he arrested. With that, Dr. Perry and I dropped out of surgery, and Dr. Perry made an incision. This was before we did closed chest massage. Dr. Perry opened his chest, and we massaged Oswald's heart for probably about 25 or 30 minutes. At first we thought maybe it was coming back and resuming some beat, but then that did not last, and he finally was pronounced dead. After he was pronounced dead, all of us on the operating team went outside to where the deputy sheriff, who had been handcuffed to Oswald when he was shot, was waiting to see what had happened. And we talked to him, and he said, you know, as soon as he was shot, I got on my hands and knees over his body and put my face down in his, and I said, son, you're hurt real bad. Would you like to tell me anything now? And he said, Oswald, with that, opened his eyes real wide, looked up at him for a long few seconds, as if he were thinking whether he wanted to say something or not. And then after those few seconds, he said, Oswald shook his head wide, very emphatically from side to side, that no, he didn't say anything, but he indicated by that gesture that he did not want to say anything. The deputy sheriff said, I'll believe to my dying day, though, that he was close to saying something that would have been very important to know, but then he closed his eyes and never opened them again. So that was what happened on that following Sunday after the Friday that President Kennedy was shot. That's what happened to Oswald and the involvement that I had with that. Now, I think that's pretty much, like I said, the first part of what I was going to comment about. The second part is certainly more tenuous, and as I often say when I'm talking about this, it's a kind of a worm's eye view rather than what I just told you, which is very directly what I saw on my own or heard from Dr. Rose. But I'm just speculating here, so that I want to get that clear. But I think they're reasonable, I believe, speculations, but some of you may have some questions or not about that. Several years later, when we really had some very uncertain ideas about this, as did I think everybody in the country, I came home one night and my wife was watching Johnny Carson. This must have been 5 or 6 years, I can't remember exactly how long, after the assassination. And she said, oh, come in here quick, because Geraldo Rivera has gotten a copy of the Zapruder video film that had been made of the president being shot on that November the 22nd. And nobody had seen this before. He got it and was going to show it on the Johnny Carson Tonight Show. So I went in and sat down and looked at that. And that was a very critical part, along with what I saw in Parkland as to the nature of the president's wounds. That was a very critical part in my coming to a conclusion, along with several other things after that I don't have time to go into all of those, that led me to believe that there were two shooters, that there was Oswald or somebody in the 6th floor book depository window at Dealey Plaza who fired the first shot. And then there was somebody behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll at Dealey Plaza who fired the second shot, the shot that actually killed the president and blew out a good portion of his brain. And if you see that film, you see the motorcade coming down off of the parade route, approaching the triple underpass there at Dealey Plaza, which I guess they saw that today. And as the president's automobile approaches, you see him all of a sudden lift his hands up to his neck, as you would expect from that wound that we saw that was explored at Parkland. And he's obviously, something has happened, something bad has happened. And then after 2 or 3 seconds, the motorcade is still moving along slowly. The motorcade disappears behind a large sign there on the edge of Dealey Plaza. And then after another second or two, it comes out from behind, and he's still got his hands up to his neck. But then after 1 or 2 seconds, all of a sudden, his head literally explodes, and he's thrown violently backward and to the left, as you might expect when a high-velocity missile hit him coming from the spot behind the picket fence. And so that, along with this posterior location in the back of his head and what we saw at Parkland, those are probably the two most critical points that make me think that there was a shooter behind the picket fence. And indeed, there's a book here that Mr. McClelland and Mr. O'Brien were kind enough to give me several years ago that describes their very careful investigation of what I've just said, that there was a shooter behind the picket fence. They described the eyewitness view of 3 men behind the picket fence, one of whom rested a rifle on top of the picket fence and fired the fatal shot. And so he tried to tell people that he had seen that, but unfortunately people wouldn't believe him because he was a deaf mute and they couldn't understand really. They said his story varied too much. And so I'm sure you maybe have heard more about that today from Mr. Quinlan and Mr. O'Brien. But I had the opportunity, thanks to them, to meet Mr. Hoffman and his wife and his daughter. And I think all of that, plus what I just described about the movie and my own witnessing of what I saw at Parkland, make me, you're never certain, obviously. And as I said, this is sort of a speculation on my part, a worm's eye view, that this is what happened, that there was not just the one shooter, Oswald from the Sixth Floor Museum, but that there were 2, one of whom was behind the picket fence, and that's not according to the official version. However, I think most of the statistics I've seen in recent years say that probably more than 80% of the American public are convinced that there was something other than what was reported in the Warren Commission. That is, that there was more than one shooter, 2, and some people have even speculated more, but I don't think that. I think there were just 2. So basically, that's kind of where I would end this right now. And if anyone wants to ask a question, I'll do what I can to answer that.
Do we need lights, Brian?
No, come on. Dr. McClelland, in your professional medical opinion, the wound that you saw in the anterior portion of the neck, was that an entrance wound or an exit wound?
We initially, Dr. Perry initially, the very first press meeting that they had about 2 or 3 hours afterwards, after the shooting, he said we speculated that it was an entrance wound because it was a small hole, not a big gaping hole like you generally would often expect from an entrance wound. Whereas an exit wound would be a great big hole like this one in the back of his head.
Like this drawing that you did for the government.
Like that drawing. And so, but then later, I certainly came to the conclusion, and I never discussed it with Dr. Perry because Dr. Perry would not talk about this to anybody under any circumstances. But my own thoughts that I got from the whole, picture, plus the Zapruder film, when his hands go up to his neck, that the bullet that was fired from the 6th floor depository hit him in the back, and there was a bullet hole in the back, which we didn't know about until the next day because we didn't turn him over and examine him because we thought that was inappropriate. But Dr. Boswell, one of the pathologists who did the postmortem in Washington, called Dr. Perry, and Dr. Perry and I officed together, and I heard the phone conversation, and asked Dr. Perry if we knew that there was a wound in the president's back, and we told him no, we didn't know that. But I think that wound was probably the bullet fired from the 6th floor book depository, came in the back, and then came out his neck. So this was an exit wound in the front rather than an
If you take a look at the picture on the left, obviously you're familiar with, that's what you drew for the government. And then this autopsy drawing that the House Senate Committee on Assassinations produced, is that what you remember the back of the president's head looking like?
What my assumption was, and we were flown in 1988, we were flown to the National Archives to to look at the postmortem films, 5 of us who were in the room, and they showed us these pictures. And what I said to some of the people there, I said, well, obviously that wound is being covered up by a flap of scalp that's being pulled forward by the pathologist's thumb and forefinger, as we see in the movie. And then someone said, no, that's not the way it was. That was just the way the back of the head looked. I said, no, that's not the way the back of the head looked.
So, in other words, these are not what you recall from the 22nd of November at Parkland Hospital?
Not that one, and I didn't see the back, of
Okay.
course, so I don't know. This one was not what I saw.
This is more of a representation of what you saw?
That's right.
Okay.
And I really think, in fact, later, someone told me that, well, yes, that was a flap. I can't remember who told me that. But I really think that's probably that there was a flap of scalp, and that the pathology prosector was pulling that flap up to try to demonstrate something here.
Oh, okay.
Whether that's true or not, I don't know. That's pure speculation. Yes.
I have a question about the throat wound. When you were examining it, I think you'd said once before that there was quite a bit of blood.
Well,
and could
yeah.
you talk about what that means?
Right, well, there was blood after they made the incision. There was no blood before they made it, it was just this neat little hole. But when they made the incision to explore that area, there was a lot of hematoma, we call it, collection of blood in that area subcutaneously around where those big vessels were. So that when they first saw that, they were concerned that one of the big vessels had been injured, but it had not. They were intact. So I think this was a relatively small missile that came through, and it came to the side of the vessels, but not through them or between them. Does that answer? Yes, ma'am.
Was that wound that you now believe to be an exit wound, was that shape and size maintained because of it being shored by the tie? Did it go through where the tie would have been?
Well, that's a good question, but no, I think probably what it was is that it was probably a low velocity, relatively light missile that didn't cause that much destruction, either in the back where it went in or in the front where it came out. It's almost as if you'd have something not as small as a 22, but not much bigger than that.
Like a .380.
Yeah, rather than a heavy bullet. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, getting back, or staying on the same area with the throat. You talked about in the Zapruder film how the president's arms go up like this. He stays like that.
Right.
Even when his wife, Mrs. Kennedy, tries to pull on his arm. In your opinion, do you think a nerve was damaged, or there was a reason
Well,
that he kept his arms like that?
I think it just hurt.
Okay.
And he, you know, whenever you're
And he
hurt.
couldn't talk.
No, and
Okay.
so, and she was leaning over to him, you know, and as you said, trying to see what was wrong. And so that clearly was a first bullet, another missile. And then several seconds later, there was this second missile that, to me, clearly came from the front rather than from the same location that first bullet came from.
Doc, would you comment about what this picture represents?
Oh, well, I'm always a little embarrassed by that, but what that is my shirt that I was wearing. When we saw President Kennedy, unlike when we saw Oswald and had the opportunity to change into surgical scrubs before we operated on Oswald, we didn't have that time with President Kennedy. So all of us rushed into Trauma Room 1. I had on a suit, and I didn't even take my coat off. And so my whole suit was soaked in the blood of the president. And so then when I went home, the next day, my wife took my suit to the cleaners. And when she handed it to the cleaner, he knew her, they knew one another, and he said, "Are you going to have this cleaned?" And she said, "My husband only has 2 suits." So she got that cleaned, which was just soaked in blood. And so I did have the presence of mind to keep the shirt that I had on intact. In fact, it's in that blue box over there for anybody who wanted to see it. And that's sort of the only memento that I have with that. So,
Students, did you guys have any questions you wanted to ask? I thought I saw some hands up. I didn't know for sure.
I have a question.
Question right here, yes.
I'm not sure if it's true, but didn't he have something like wasn't something about his spine, like so he couldn't move very well in his back?
about his what now?
His spine and his back.
He had a back
Oh, his
injury.
spine. No, he didn't have any injury of his spine. Is that your question?
Before.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Pardon me for being dense. Yeah, he did have, in fact, he had some kind of ace bandage wrapped around his leg, and he had a corset on when he came in. They cut him out of all of that before I saw him. The nurses automatically, one of the routine things you do with a trauma patient whenever they come into the emergency room is you cut all their clothing off so you can see them completely and be sure you're not missing any injuries anywhere. But when they cut off all of that, he did have a corset around his spine because he, as you point out, he did have a previous injury to his spine. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Doc, there's a picture behind you of Trauma Room 1. Just so that these folks could understand the size of this room, could you estimate, just to give us a ballpark figure, how big that room was?
Oh, my gosh, I'm guessing. I'm not too good at that. I would say it's probably, anybody has a different idea, it strikes me along the back there, that's probably 10 to 12 feet, and it's probably 12 to 16 feet, vertical, lengthwise. Small room. And so the president was lying on a gurney like this, and he was lying with his feet toward the door of Trauma Room 1, a little bit propped up, and with his face, with one of these lights shining down in his face, so that his face was facing the door. That was the first thing I saw when I came in. And Dr. Baxter was here, Dr. Perry was over there, and then I went and stood up here next to Dr. Jenkins, the anesthesiology professor.
How many people were in this room at this time?
Oh, I don't know exactly, but it was ultimately, after a few minutes, it was jammed with people coming in. Mrs. Kennedy kept coming in and out, but Dr. Clark could try to, make her not as shocked by it. Every time she came in, he would gently usher her back out of the room. So, but it was, very busy.
I almost forgot to ask you about this. I have read that some of the Secret Service people were in the room very distressed. Could you talk about that?
Well, I don't know about Secret Service. They well could have been, because there were people in and we were concentrating on what we were doing. However, I do know one of the interesting things that was called to our attention, even just as we were finishing up, I think it was some kind of a man in some kind of uniform, stepped into Trauma Room 1, very, quietly, and set this bag down beside him. And I heard someone say near where we were at the head of the stretcher, said, "Oh, the bag man just came in." He's the man that carries the atomic codes for initiating a strike. And of course, at that time, we didn't know whether this was the beginning of something from the Russians, and this was a very, very tense time there in the early 60s between us and the Russians. So he came in to have the codes ready for a nuclear strike.
There's a group of you, the House staff in Parkland, young Robert
A few years
McClelland
ago.
there. Yeah, a few years ago.
46, I think.
Yeah. Is Dr. Duke still alive?
Yes, he is.
Is he? Okay.
Dr. Perry's dead. Dr. Shires is dead. Dr. Carrico, back up here. This is Dr. Carrico. He's
Okay.
the one who intubated the president when he came in. He was a resident in the emergency room, a first-year surgery resident. He subsequently, many years later, was the chief of surgery at the University of Washington in Seattle, and then was our chief of surgery in the 1990s.
Dr. Perry still alive?
No, he died 2 years ago of lung cancer. And Dr. Baxter died. He's not in that picture,
Yeah.
but
Dr. Gustafson's still alive.
Dr. Who?
Am I saying it right? Gustafson? Gustafson?
Oh,
with
yeah,
a
he's
G?
still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. And I'm sure some of those are gone that I don't know about. But-
Dr. McClelland, I was kind of curious, from being involved with taking care of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald, and later working on Abraham Zapruder's appendix, being involved in these three individuals, some of the most important, people at the time, what has it done to you on a personal and also on as a surgeon and a physician's level? What has it done to you over the years and at the time?
Well, that's a sort of a tough question to answer. Obviously, that was the most significant thing that ever happened to me. I can't say because my whole life has always been attuned to doing things like this, particularly trauma surgery. I'm what's called a gastrointestinal surgeon, but I've also done a lot of trauma surgery for many years. I was on the faculty at Southwestern Medical School from 1962 until I retired about 3 years ago. So, I've done countless operations like this, and so I've seen a lot of people with injuries like this, but only one president, obviously. And as I said, while that's very significant, I can't say that it has changed my life or anything, dramatic like that. As important as it is, it's certainly the signal event in my life, but I can't say that it, really changed my personality or anything like that.
Okay.
It's interesting you mentioned the involvement with Zapruder, who took the video, and actually he had a gastric cancer, is what he had rather than his appendix. But one day, many years later, I got a call from a friend of mine at Presbyterian Hospital here, and he said he had operated and done a gastrectomy that day for a patient of his, and he thought he was developing some problems in his abdomen, and asked me if I was going to be at the hospital that afternoon, and I said, yes, I'm going to be making rounds there. He said, well, would you scrub with me when I re-explore this patient of mine? I said, sure, I'll be out there in a couple of hours. Got out there, went into the operating room, and I asked the nurse in charge at the desk there, I said, what room are we operating in? And she said, oh, I think it's room 5. So I walked around to the scheduling board in the hallway there outside the operating room, looked up at the board, and it saw that the patient in room 5 was named Mr. A. Zapruder, the fellow who had so the odds of that happening are a little odd.
Way out.
But then 2 years before the assassination, another very strange coincidence. I was a resident still at Parkland at that time. My wife, who was a nurse, had been working at Baylor Hospital across town part-time, and one of the patients she was helping take care of was Mr. Sam Rayburn, who was the Speaker of the House at that time, and he had developed a pancreatic cancer and had come back home for treatment. He was from Bonham, Texas, and was being treated by Dr. Jesse Thompson, one of the surgeons at Baylor. And my wife was helping take care of him. And so she called me one day and said she had forgotten to pick up her check at Baylor. And I never went to Baylor. But she said, would you go by there on your way home and pick up my check? And I said, sure. So I went over there that afternoon and parked across the street from Baylor Hospital and was walking across Gaston Avenue there in front of the hospital. And I looked over to my left and saw 3 motorcycle policemen leading a small motorcade of 3 long black limousines. And I thought, well, I wonder what that is. And there was a side entrance to Baylor Hospital at that time that's no longer there. And I and the motorcade and the policeman all arrived at that side entrance at about the same time. And I found myself standing at the curb behind the rear door of the lead limousine. And one of the motorcycle policemen got off his motorcycle, came back and very politely asked me to step back out of the way so he could open the door of the limousine. And when he did so, who should step out but President Kennedy. And President Kennedy had come to Dallas, flown in special, to see Mr. Sam Rayburn, who was a very potent political force at that time in Washington. And so when my wife asked me when I got home that evening, she said, "Did you pick up my check?" And I said, "Yes, and guess what else?" So, that's another strange part of this story, to me strange.
You couldn't write anything more unusual
No.
than that.
No, it's a little hard to believe.
Wow.
So, anyway, well,
Students,
thank you.
did
What
you
other
have any
questions?
questions at all?
Well, Casey, let's see, can we take 10 minutes or so if folks want to get pictures or have something signed by Dr. McClelland? And I think probably some of them might want to look at that shirt
We can
before
do
we go.
that, but I just wanted to express my thanks for Dr. McClelland coming out here to at least give our students an opportunity to at least see him and hear him in person, because this is a rare situation that you would see something like this, especially coming all the way down from Marysville, Kansas, as we did. I want to express our thanks for you coming out, but also as a history teacher for the past 37 years, I want to express the idea that I don't think our history in this country has done you or anybody in this particular situation given the truth behind this entire murder case. In fact, I think that we have raped this case. I think that we have raped history. And I'm very profound when I say this, and I've been saying it my entire life. We don't know what history is all about because we have been lied to from the top, from Washington, D.C. to Dallas, Texas. And I firmly believe that the truth is out there, but I'm not sure where it is.
No.
But I think that you have given us an opportunity because of your veracity and also your truthfulness here that you've given our students an opportunity to be able to take this back with them and say, we heard somebody that actually was there, saw what took place, and we want to thank you for that. So, guys,
Well,
we do. Our next lady that's going to get up and give us some information about trajectories, and I'm not going to say that much about her, but I just want to point out to her that Sherry Fiester has spoken nationally, internationally about all different types of blood spatter, and she's going to talk a lot about what's the trajectories of where she thinks, according to her research, of where the shots may have come that actually killed and took the life of President Kennedy. So, Sherry Fiester.
Applause and anticipation. Okay, you have a piece of paper, and there's paper on the tables. Get a piece of paper. You might need 2 of them, and a pen or a pencil. Okay, and while you're doing that, I want to ask you. You did go to Dealey Plaza, right?
Yep.
Were you surprised at how small it was? Did you walk around Dealey Plaza?
Yep.
Did you walk all the way around it?
Uh-huh.
Y'all walked all the way around. Okay. No, all right.
No, never mind. I don't think so.
Okay.
Either one.
It doesn't matter, pen or pencil. Nobody's going to see this but you. All right? It doesn't have to be pretty.
Who needs a pen?
All right. I'm going to teach you. Here's one. Okay. I'm going to teach you how to do trajectory analysis. Listen, for 25 years I worked in law enforcement. I was a crime scene reconstructionist. I did blood spatter analysis. You watch that show Dexter?
No.
Why do y'all not watch Dexter? It's about blood spatter analysis. Okay, that's what I did, and testified a lot in court. And I want to tell you that you were asked a question a little earlier, like if you were a detective, what would you be thinking? Well, that's what I was. I was a detective. And when you get ready to take information to court, you can't take to court what you just think. You have to take to court what you know. And you have to convince a jury. And the best way to do that is to teach the jury before you tell them your expert opinion, because the only people allowed to give opinions in court are experts. Okay, so you are going to be the jury, and I'm going to teach you how to do analysis, and then I'm going to show you my analysis, and we'll see if you came up with the same thing that I did. Because trajectory analysis deals with math, and math is not my ideas, it's not my opinion, it just is. You can't massage it or bend it and make it come out like you want it to. It is what it is. And you might, in the Kennedy assassination, talk to a lot of people and read a lot of books, read a lot of articles, and a lot of that information is going to be scientific and based in fact, and some of it's not. But this is something that's going to be based in fact. And when you come to your conclusion, then you ought to be able to say, this is what I believe now, and this is why I believe it, and you'll have at least one thing settled, because there's a lot of confusion in the Kennedy assassination. Okay, how many people think that they think that Oswald was the one that actually did the headshot and killed Kennedy? Because that's the headshot's what we're going to talk about. If you think Oswald did it, raise your hand. And there's really no right and wrong, because you know there's no right and wrong because you don't have any facts yet, right? Okay, so one person at least knows what they think. Does that mean that the rest of you all believe that someone else killed President Kennedy?
I listened to them.
You listen to them, okay. So who out there doesn't know, or they're still on the fence? If you're on the fence, raise your hand. All right, there's a couple of people that are on the fence. You are the people that really need to pay attention, because this is something that's so important. You can't be on the fence about this. You need to know where you stand. This is a part of our history, and it's a part of what makes your generation the way it is today. Because of what happened to my generations, we said that's not happening again. You were raised differently, and you have different ideas. And this is why. So you need to know what you believe when it comes to the Kennedy assassination. So the very first thing we're going to do in trajectory analysis is you determine where is the location of the wounds. Well, we've already had a surgeon here that told us where he thought the location of the wounds were, but there's a lot of pictures out there. You maybe read other things or had people talk to you, but I'm going to tell you that the majority of people that are researchers, or maybe not serious researchers, but just interested in the Kennedy assassination, have all come to pretty much the same conclusion. They believe that all of the injury to the president's head is on the right side of his head, that there's not anything injured on the left side of his head. So we're going to start by drawing as if you were looking down on the top of the head. So on a piece of paper, draw an oval. And you're like looking down on top of the head. Okay? Draw your oval. And on one edge of the oval, put like a little bump that you're going to say that's the nose, so that you know which way that little head is looking. Okay? Now, if you were to take what would look like crosshairs and do like this, right down the center and right across the middle of that oval, then you would have divided that head into 4 sections. Okay?
You want to naturally put cross.
I want you to put that cross inside that little oval that you have drawn. Now, most people think that whether it's an entry or exit, that it entered or exited in the right front quadrant and entered and exited on the right rear quadrant. So when you have a trajectory that you can say it came from here to there in a straight line trajectory, like when Dr. McClelland was saying Oswald was shot and it went in a straight line. But we don't have a straight line here. We don't have a little hole here and a little hole there and we can connect the dots. Because what happened is the head literally exploded and you had this big, he said, 5-inch wound in the back. So that's not a little point. But what we can say is that we can use the entire right side of the head as entries and exit. So what we do to determine the location of the wounds is imagine that I am President Kennedy and that someone shoots me right just to the right side of center and it went straight back. That would be one trajectory, one possible trajectory. But what if that person was over at an angle and it went in the same place, but it came out right behind my ear? I have created, by doing that, a triangle. Can you visualize that? What if the person was over there shooting me and they came in just before my ear and it came out in the back, but still on the right side? Then that would be another possible trajectory. Well, what if I took those two trajectories that went from the two extremes and I said, that's a triangle, okay? I want you to do that where you think the bullet might have gone in, either from the front or the back, whatever you believe, and where you think it might have gone out. Make those two extremes so that you come up with an angle. Now, once you've done that, the next step is to determine the target position. We know where President Kennedy was seated, in the limousine, right? And we know that the limousine is in Dealey Plaza. Do you remember when you were in Dealey Plaza and you stood up on the bridge and you looked back at the road? It kind of did this. It made like a wine glass shape, okay? If you were standing on the bridge and you looked out at that X is where he was shot, is actually in the curvy part of the road. It's in the curve. It's not on the straightaway. So he is in a little curved area. But where is he in the car? We're going to go forward in just a minute because I want him to understand this first. So when he's sitting in the car, have you seen the slide from the Zapruder film just before he's shot in the head? He's kind of turned to the side, and if he was to straighten up, he'd be looking.
You want a chair?
No, I'm good. He would be looking over, like about the left front wheel of the limousine. So he's not looking towards the bridge straight ahead. The car is turned, and he's turned within the car. So that would be the next thing, is to determine the target position. Then we put the limousine in the scene, and then we take that angle that you drew on your piece of paper, and we recreate that angle in Dealey Plaza. And then that tells us the area that the shooter could be in. Okay? So let's do that real quick. All right, so this is what I did. I determined the approximate location of the wounds. You can go to the, okay. All right, this is what we have. We have entry, medical testimony says the parietal area, that's the area that's in blue, and exit is in like the pink area. Remember Dr. McClelland said it was way in the back of the brain where that big hole was? Okay, that's that area. And they're saying that entry was somewhere up in here, okay? So if you're looking bird's eye view down, they're gonna say, the medical evidence says, entry or exit in the right front at the top, and entry or exit, and I believe exit in the back on the right lower back. Next slide. If you look at the target's position, you can do a couple of different things. They have this Zapruder film, but they also have other photographs, and they use that information. And the Warren Commission had Thomas Canning. He was an engineer from NASA that looked at all of the information, and he said there's two different types of movement. First off, Kennedy's head is tilted down. He's not looking straight up. And the other thing is that he's turned away from Zapruder. Zapruder was almost at a 90-degree angle to him, but he's turned away from Zapruder and has his head tilted down. Now, he said that it's tilted forward 15 degrees, and then Dale Myers, who is a computer reconstruction expert that does absolutely fabulous work, he did that, and he said it's forward 27 degrees. Now, Canning said that his head is tilted to the left 15 degrees away from Zapruder, And Myers' reconstruction said 18, and those are really close, but the other one is a little bit different. But if you would look right here, this is the frame they're looking at right there. Which one do you think is closer? The one that Dale Myers did or the one that Canning did? I think probably Dale Myers is a little bit closer. That's just looking at that photograph right there. Okay, so we have the tilt and the direction that he's moved away from Zapruder, who's at about a 90-degree angle to him. Okay. So if we put him in the limousine, and you can see he's at a 90-degree angle to Zapruder, and we turn his head and tilt it like these people said, then if you were looking down, this is about what you would see right there. All right, so now we have him, he's positioned in the limousine, and then we're going to put the limousine in Dealey Plaza. So go to the next slide. All right, placement within the scene. All right, here is an overhead of Dealey Plaza, and the end of this little pink line is where Kennedy, approximately where Kennedy was at the time that he was shot in the head. And if you extend where he's looking, if he were to just look straight up, the way his nose would be facing, he would be facing over there. That's on the opposite side of the grassy knoll. And you know if you walked across the bridge over the overpass, when you got on the other side, there's like a little area that turns. That's about the area that he's looking. Okay, next slide. So what are the angles of trajectory that we would come up with if we used your head, okay, that you drew? This is the extreme examples that I talked to you about. If someone just came in just to the right of center and exited right behind the ear, or if they came in just before the ear and exited just to the right of center in the back, then if you combine these in the next slide, then you get an angle. Now this is two-dimensional. It's not three-dimensional. It doesn't give you the up and down thing, okay? And it's just an estimate because we don't have the exact point of entry or exit, but we have this. And if you take that, that's something that you can measure. Go to the next slide. So if you put that down, with a protractor, you'd get about 50 degrees. That's the most extreme angle that you could possibly come up with, is 50 degrees. Okay? But realistically, he would have had to have had the wound way on the side, not on the back, more like what Dr. McClelland was saying. So I think we could probably narrow that down just a little bit. If you go to the next slide, this is probably a lot better based upon the medical evidence and witness testimony that we have available for us to look at. And this measures less than 50 degrees. In fact, I think it measures about 30 degrees. 28, all right? That's a reasonable trajectory. 28 degrees. So if you take the 28 degrees and then you use that information with where you have him facing in the car and where you have the car within Dealey Plaza, then you can extend that out and determine where the shooter might have been. Okay, so that's what we do. Extend the possible trajectory out into the scene. So this is what we've done. Here's the 50% or degree of angle. This over here is the pergola area. This is the grassy knoll. This is where the fence is. It's not even included within the 50 degrees. So the shooter cannot possibly be behind the fence for the headshot. Okay, go to the next slide. If you use a 28 degree of possible trajectories, then you narrow that even more. So I think that math says that the shooter was over there. So if the shooter's over there, you can go to the next slide. Why are all these people running up there to the grassy knoll? Do I think that there was not a shot from there? No, I support that there was a shot from the grassy knoll. I just don't think that we can prove mathematically that the headshot came from the grassy knoll. So, if you go to the next slide. What if the grassy knoll shooter had fired the shot? What would the trajectory look like within the head? If you were to do that, here's the pruder. Okay, this is, as you angle down, there still is, no matter how far away you get, you cannot make that exit wound on the right side of the head. It's always going to be on the left side of the head. And that's just math. There's no way to change it. So it proves that the shooter was not, for the headshots, not behind the grassy knoll, and that he is on the opposite side. But how can somebody be on the opposite side and nobody ever noticed them? Go to the next slide. Okay. You need certain requirements in order to assassinate someone, because that's what this was. You need concealment so that people don't see you. You need an exit. You need a way to get away, because it doesn't do any good to kill somebody if you get caught. And then there's elevation. Is the bridge high enough to get up over the limousine and into the car? And then the angle has to be right. So let's look and see if there's a place over there. That was the end. That's okay. When you I thought I had one more picture up there and I don't. But that's okay. If you ever get a chance to go back to Dealey Plaza.
We will go tomorrow.
You are going to go tomorrow. Okay, go across the overpass. As you're going across the overpass, I want you to notice that if you're walking, you cannot see that other area. Somebody could be over there. Because there were people on the overpass waiting to see President Kennedy come by. And if they looked, they couldn't see anybody. Because those big concrete lettuce is, keeping them concealed. Okay? There's a fence there now. But at that time, there was no fence. And that was a public parking lot. So they could, okay, now this area right here, there's no fence. All this was just open. Someone could have parked here, and then they would have been right in this area right here. This is a parking lot. They could have just gotten in their car and driven away. And everybody's over here looking and running over there because they heard something over there. And some people say, well, I didn't hear any shots. Nobody said they heard any shots from over there. Well, you don't have to hear shots because they're suppressors for rifles, and it confuses where shots are coming from. But there's been no acoustical testing to determine whether or not a shot could have come from the other side. So there's not anything to prove that this does not work, and there's math to say that it does. So if you were the jury, do you think I would have convinced you that the shooter was not behind the fence at the grassy knoll? Have I convinced you? Is there anybody else that's left on the fence? Nobody's on the fence? That's all I wanted to do. Thank you.
And that, guys, is pure science. If you've been in my class, we talked about social science. Social science and social studies. It's an impure science. In fact, I don't even think the word science should be in it. So we call it studies. But math and science are pure science. 1 + 1 will always equal 2 if you're in the desk, unless you're binary code.
Thank y'all so much. I hope you enjoy your trip here. I really do.
Thanks, Sherry. On the 22nd of November 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated. We already know that. At about 1:15 or so, 4 miles away in Oak Cliff, a suburb of Dallas, according to the government, Lee Harvey Oswald shot and killed police officer J.D. Tippit at a place called 10th and Patton, which we're going to go to tomorrow. According to the government, Lee Harvey Oswald, as he fled that scene, walked up Jefferson Boulevard, which was the busiest street in town at that time. Would that be a fair assumption to say? As he did so, he was spotted by our next guest. Johnny Brewer was, as you see in this picture, a young, handsome young man, And he still is. A little taller. You can't tell the height, but he's very tall. He was the manager of the Hardy Shoe Store at 231 West Jefferson. Now, I'm not going to tell his story because I'm going to let him tell it to you, but Mr. Brewer is a very integral part of how Oswald got captured by the Dallas police. So, please welcome Johnny Brewer.
All right. First of all, I'm just really honored to be here because you guys are the first group I've ever spoken to in 48 years. This larger group, I've spoken to researchers and Oliver Stone and, a bunch of this and that, but as far as a group of guys, so if I sound like I'm nervous, it's because I am, and I'm not used to speaking. But on that day, November 22nd, 63, it's actually kind of a quirk that I was even there. The night before, I had just taken delivery on a special order Galaxy XL 500 with the police interceptor engine, a 427, 4-in-the-floor, go-fast car. And I had planned to run it that day with a few buddies of mine. And I got the call that morning that my assistant manager, who was to work, couldn't come in because his little baby was sick, so I went in. Fed nickels in the parking meter all day long to that car. And had been listening to the radio and knew that the president had been shot. And it was also confirmed that he had expired. Then there was a bulletin that just a few blocks away from me in Oak Cliff, an officer had been shot. And didn't put the two together at all. But in a few moments, police cars were flying up and down Zangs Boulevard and Jefferson Boulevard. And of course, everybody was going outside onto the sidewalk and observing, what's going on here. And as I was fixing to go outside, this young man comes into the recessed area of my store, the lobby, where on either side are display cases, and then you enter the store. And he stood there with his back to the street. And I just stood there and looked at him, and I'm thinking, I know this guy, but I've seen him somewhere. But why is he standing there with his back to the street like he's looking at shoes when the cops are going by? So I didn't think that was totally, the right picture at all. So he turned after the cops went by and walked on up the Jefferson Boulevard toward the Texas Theater. And I walked outside and I watched him all the way up to the theater, which might have been 50 yards or so. I watched him walk into the theater. And I'm thinking, well, just something is not right about this picture. I locked up the store. I went up to the theater, and Julie Postal, who was the cashier at the theater, we all knew each other up and down the street. And I asked Julie if she had sold a ticket to somebody matching this description. And I'd like to put to rest the story that's out there was that Lee Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater because he didn't buy a ticket. That's not at all why he was arrested. I was asking Julie if she had sold him a ticket just to confirm in my mind that she had seen this person. I described him. And did he seem funny to her or what? Why am I'm 22 years old. I'm walking up there wondering what is going on and why am I doing this? She said she had been out on the street and she didn't see anybody go in. So I walked inside, and Butch Burroughs, who was the concessionaire, I asked him, gave him the description, and had he seen him come in. Butch said no, that he had been working, stocking the concession shelves. And so he hadn't seen him. I'm trying to figure out, why am I following this guy? Does he seem funny to anybody else, or is it just me? And so I said, Butch, come go with me. So we walked down, we went up into the balcony first. And the movie was going, and it was two black and white movies,
War as
battle
hell.
cry and war as hell. And it was the night scene, so it was really dark. Didn't see anybody up there. Walked back down. I walked down to the stage, turned around and walked back up, and it's so dark I'm still not seeing anybody. I don't see who I'm looking for. So I walked out to the front and I asked Julie to call the police. I said, Julie, somebody is in there that is just not right. I mean, something's up. I don't know what it is. He's acting strange. Call the police. And so she did, and I walked back in. I said, Butch, stand by the front exit. I'm gonna go down to the back exit, which was a curtain drawn by the stage that leads out to the fire exit, leads out into the alley. And so I stood there for a few moments, and you know, time was just, I'm still wondering, why am I here? What the hell am I doing, you know? And all of a sudden, and the movie was still on, the lights came on. And I looked out from behind the curtain, and I saw, who turned out to be Lee Oswald, stand up out of his seat and walk toward the right-hand aisle, and then just sit back down again, just a couple of seats back from where he had been sitting. And I looked up at the balcony, and there were cops up there with all kinds of armament. And about that time, there was a knock on the door, the fire escape door. I opened it, and I was immediately grabbed and pulled out into the alley. There was a shotgun held on me. There were several policemen out there, uniformed and plainclothesmen. And I explained to them, I'm not going to get looking for them, but let's go inside and I'll show you who you're looking for. So Officer McDonald, myself, and another policeman walked out onto the stage, and I pointed him out. And Oswald was just sitting there, you know, just nonchalant, sitting there. And Officer McDonald jumped off the stage, about the height of this table probably. He walked up the left aisle as you're looking toward the seating. The other policeman and myself jumped off the right-hand side and walked up. As they were walking up, there might have been probably less than 20 in the theater, I don't know. But they were telling people to get up and move, you know, get out of the way, all the while watching Oswald. But for whatever reason, I'm just drawn into this, like, what have I done, you know? And I'm thinking, well, whatever I did is serious, because look at everything going on here. And Officer McDonald walked in the aisle that Oswald was sitting on, and just tapped him on the shoulder, told him to get up. And when he did, Oswald came up out of the chair and threw a left hook and caught McDonald upside the head, I forget which side, but knocked him back. I mean, that was a good shot he made. And Officer McDonald is getting back up. At this time, Lee Oswald pulls the .38 out of his belt. His shirt tail was out. I hadn't seen the gun. I probably wouldn't have been doing this. But he pulls the gun out and points it at McDonald. As McDonald's getting up, just like that, McDonald grabbed, and I didn't see for sure, but I know that Oswald pulled the trigger. And of course, at that time, I'm kind of watching it from a little lower angle. And Officer McDonald, I said that the hammer hit the fleshy part of his hand, and that prevented the hammer from blowing his head off, basically. So in just a short amount of time, they were just strumming his head, took the gun away from him. There were police coming over the seats, and I mean, it's just all going on so fast, it's just a blur, basically. I mean, they handcuffed him. Now, I heard something, I was talking to Brian about this, nobody else has said it when I told the Warrant Commission. They said it probably isn't so because Oswald was not a suspect in the assassination at that time. But to this day, I know I heard somebody say, "Kill the president, will you?" And I have no idea who did. And when I'm on my deathbed, I will still say, somebody said, "Kill the president, will you?" Well, they handcuffed Oswald and took him out the aisle. And we're just standing this close. We took him out, he's handcuffed. And he looked me square in the eye and said, "I'm not resisting arrest." And I'm thinking, well, yeah, you are, you know, according to what I think might be resisting arrest. So they let him on out the front. I didn't get to go out front and watch them actually put him in the car and take him away.
Picture of him
Yeah.
coming out.
And I was detained by Secret Service or FBI or whoever, and got my identification and this and that and this and that. And by the time I was released to go back down to my store, they'd gone. So I basically went down the store, and I'm still saying, man, what have I done? But all the shops were closing up at that time. This was probably 2 o'clock, a little after 2 or so by this time. And so I just closed up and went home. And my wife worked at Blue Cross downtown. They shut down early too. She came home and she asked me if I'd seen or heard about anything going on in the area. And I said, yeah, I really did.
It's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah. And my mom called. She was in Lockhart, Texas, where I grew up in Lockhart. Just I live in Austin now. And she called and said she'd seen it on the news. She said, "Oh, I hope you were nowhere close." As a matter of fact, it just wasn't registering. You know, I guess communications at that time were so slow, or so you just didn't know really what was going on. The next day, I saw him on TV, shuffling him from one room to another, been interrogated. Still, not sure what's happening here. Why have I done this? And then Sunday, I'm out in the parking lot washing my new car because it got some dust on it. And my wife came out and said, Oswald's been shot. I said, damn, you know, what happened there, you know? And Jack Ruby. Well, I knew Jack Ruby. I met Jack Ruby. One of his employees, Kathy Kay, who danced at the Carousel, lived in the same apartment complex as my wife and I did. And she had 2 little girls, and because she worked nights and we had, you know, different schedules, we would watch her little girls while they swam. And she was living with a policeman, Dallas cop, by the name of Harry. We said Olson. And so, you know, when Dr. McClelland was talking about what a small world, first of all, Oswald is somebody I've seen before, and I finally have the proof in my mind, because when Oswald was killed, his remains, his possessions, they're photographed are a pair of the shoes that clearly say John Hardy in there. And now I remember Oswald as being just really an annoying person. He was very fastidious. It took him all afternoon. I just thought, he said, you know, let me know when you're ready. And
So you sold him a pair of shoes before this happened?
and basically I just brought it back as to why I knew that I had seen him before. But I didn't really have proof in my own mind until 10 or 11 years ago, when a researcher came and visited with me and brought a picture of the shoes. And that, in my mind, sold it. That is one of the reasons that I followed him, was that I recognized him. And then, of course, his suspicious manner. And so I knew Kathy Kay, Jack Ruby. He wouldn't know me, you know, but we would go down. I met him there at the Carousel. And a few months, weeks, I don't know, it was maybe after the first year, I'm working with a customer, and I look up and I see this taxi cab pull up, and out of the cab comes this lady who I recognize from TV as Margaret Oswald, Lee's mom. And she walks in the door, just, you know, her presence is, she is just there, you know, in your face right now. And she said, "Mr. Brewer." I said, "Yes, Ms. Oswald, I'll be right with you." And the only thing she really had to say, though, was that as Lee's mom, she did not believe that he killed Kennedy. I said, well, I have no idea. I just, I know what I know. But as a mom, she was defending Lee. And then she left, and that was it. It got pretty exciting. Actually, the next day after the assassination, when I went to work, and there was sound trucks from CBS and NBC and ABC, and it was just crazy for months, constant, just. And so I went into the Navy in 1966, got out in '69, and when I got discharged, I went back to Austin. Although my job was held for me while I was in the service, I had just had enough of Dallas. I just felt I didn't want to go back. And so really, my closest friends know, but people who just come over to my house, and I've got a big wall filled with newspaper articles, pictures, this and that, memorabilia, And they will walk in and look at that and say, "What the hell did you do?" And I just don't really get into it much. So like I say, when Ryan asked me last year at the 6th Floor Museum if I would come up, I said, yeah, I'll do that, Of course, I'm thinking, man, it's 6 months away. It's something will happen. But so here we are tonight, and it happened. And I'm glad it did, and I thank you guys for coming out. That's me.
Don't turn around, but tell our students what you remember Lee Oswald wearing that day.
Well, pair of John Hardy shoes, I found out.
All right. Besides the shoes, John.
Some dark slacks. I don't know if they were dark blue or black or whatever. Had on a long sleeve shirt, which as I recall was buttoned at the sleeve. Shirt tail was out, and a white T-shirt.
Turn around and look and see if that's what you remember.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly. It was a patterned check shirt.
This is the guy you saw in your doorway.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the knot over his left eye was from one of the punches when they were taking the gun away from him.
Did you testify to the government?
Yeah, I went before the Warren Commission, which was after a few weeks of flying everybody up to Washington. I guess it got cost prohibitive or something. So they brought like J. Lee Rankin and a couple of other attorneys down to take depositions. And so, yes, I did have a Warren Commission testimony.
During that testimony, did you get the impression that they were not very interested in your story, or
Not at all.
trying to rush you through it?
No, actually, they seemed quite interested, and they didn't try to lead me in any way. It was very simply, tell us, what happened, this and that. It probably didn't take over 30 minutes at the most, the testimony. And he asked me if I'd like to sign it now or come back when it was published and sign it there. And I said, I'll sign it now. It doesn't really matter. So, no, I didn't feel like they were trying to lead in any direction.
Good.
48 years later after the assassination, you were living there, saw what took place. You were there in Dallas during this time.
Right.
From what the Warren Commission said to what has been brought out, as of today, do you feel it was Oswald that shot President Kennedy, or do you think it was a conspiracy?
All I know is what I know. I have my own thoughts as to what happened, but it doesn't matter what I think. I know why. Several people know how he was arrested. Anybody who was involved in it, but I know why he was arrested. And that's really all I know for sure. I have my own opinion, though, as to whether or not he was the lone shooter, if he was a nut case, I worked with Oliver Stone on JFK, and that's like several hours I'll never get back in my life. When you've got Donald Sutherland as Mr. X, who there is no Mr. X, compilation of several witnesses never named, that's about all I need to know to not take that real seriously. And then Kevin Costner was, Gary Oldman played Oswald. It was interesting and fun to be involved, but I just hope that that movie JFK is not what everybody takes home with them, and that is the gospel truth. Because
Right.
Take a look. Now we all know where the theater is, but is the green building? Is that your shoe store?
if it's 213, it is.
Yeah. Well, there was no addresses on any of those four
It
buildings.
looks like it because of the recessed area there,
Okay.
and a larger store next to it. I think it was like Baker's Shoes, or
Okay.
there's several retail stores there.
And you
Yeah,
say,
that's a good representation.
and you said, if I heard you right, you said after you watched Oswald walk down the street,
Right.
you went back and locked the store up.
Right.
Were there customers inside or anything?
No, there was actually two guys that were visiting. They had actually worked part-time for me on the weekends maybe. They were IBM or some printing machine mechanics or repairmen. And we knew them, and so when I locked up, they left.
And you saw Oswald actually walk into the
Saw
theater?
him take a right and walk in, and the box office is right out flush with,
Yeah.
so
This is the ticket booth here?
actually,
But it was out front.
it was out front.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't there. It was out front.
There- now there's
Not
a-
right there, yeah.
Okay, it was right there.
So he walked
Okay.
in, Julie was standing out on the sidewalk. He walked in, I don't know which door, but I did actually see him walk in.
What is this?
That's the first floor. Concession stand would be back over here. That probably looks like about the center aisle of the theater.
Okay. And you walked, how did you get to the back door?
There's another aisle
Over
on the
here?
other side of that curtain
Okay,
that leads down to the stage, and then there's a curtain
okay.
that leads behind the stage, and then a fire exit door out into the alley.
This is the center aisle.
This is the center aisle here.
Okay. What row and what seat was he in when you
My
first
guess,
saw him?
he was basically in the center, no more than 4 or 5 rows forward in the screen.
Somewhere in this area here?
I would almost say, there we go, somewhere up there. But,
Okay.
like I say, he got up and walked toward that aisle and took a couple of steps and then just turned around and sat back down again. I guess he was resigned to the fact that he was busted, or something was fixing to happen.
Yeah. Questions? Ask. You got a material witness here. Certainly there's a question in your head somewhere. This is your best opportunity you're ever going to get to talk to a material witness.
Yeah, not only is he a material witness, he's the one that pointed out Oswald. That's why he was arrested.
If he had-
Because of him.
Nobody else saw him go in.
No?
Now, I'm sure that he would have been arrested at some point because they were looking for him. How long it would have taken, I have no idea. Would he have pulled that gun and actually shot somebody? I don't know, But as far as actually seeing him walk in the theater, I was the only one. And I pointed him out to the cops. And I only asked Julie if she had sold him a ticket just to verify or confirm in my mind that this guy was acting strange. And neither one, her or Butch Burroughs, saw it. It was on me.
How old were you then?
22.
22.
Yeah.
22.
Yeah, I'm 48, so that's been what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 70.
It's 22. Yes, sir.
With the portrayal that was in JFK,
Right.
from what you had told Oliver Stone,
Yeah.
from what was in there compared to what you told him, was the portrayal of the actor that portrayed you, was it pretty accurate?
Pretty accurate, yeah. They spent several hours shooting the capture of a look-alike or somebody in the alley. Well, after I explained that's another thing that just did not happen. Some civilian from several down the alley saw somebody grabbed by the police and taken out and said there was a second person arrested. And Oliver Stone shot that different angles for I don't know how long. I said, Oliver, it didn't happen. That was me. That was me that when it was the guy was taken out with guns on, it looked like I was in trouble, but I wasn't.
And they didn't haul you away, so you
No,
were still
no,
there
so-
when you got.
And the guy firmly believed that somebody was being arrested, which it looked like. But
Oh, yeah.
No, it
Right.
didn't happen at all.
Yeah, I could see how they could get that confused, absolutely, yeah. What else?
Did it take the cops long to get there?
Really not. They were in the neighborhood because Officer Tippett had been shot more than 10 blocks away, I guess. So they were in the area.
Yeah, they were running up and down
Yeah.
Jefferson, all looking for everybody, looking for anybody they could find.
That's Zhang's Avenue, and they were just going everywhere.
How far is it from your shoe store to the entrance to the theater?
Probably no more than 50 yards or so.
50 yards?
It just maybe takes
Okay,
15 seconds at the most to walk normally and reach there.
all right.
From the time that you saw Oswald pass your store,
Right.
had you already heard that President Kennedy had been shot?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I listened
so-
to a transistor radio and knew that he'd been shot. They had announced that the president's dead. And then everything was happening fast. And then they said that an officer in Oak Cliff had been shot, and I recognized that as being real close and in the police cars. So that started alerting a lot of people to something happening.
Do you recall a description that was given
Yeah.
that would have pointed the
Matched,
fact that that would have kind of
basically,
matched Oswald?
Yeah, like 5'9", 155, 60 pounds.
They said that on the on your you heard that over the radio?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. And so, but I don't think that's what really at all caught my attention, was his description. It was the fact that he walked in and seemed to be shopping for shoes on the display window while all this is going on behind him, the cops going by. And then when they had all gone by, he looks over his shoulder as if to see if it's clear, and then he walks out and walks up to the theater. I stand out in front of the store and just watch him thinking, what's going on? What happened? And, that's basically the whole ball of wax right there. Is I had to follow up for some reason in my mind, that this guy was not acting right. That's my,
When he walked up, was he walking fast and was he like out of breath
he
or
looked
sweating or
like,
anything like
well,
that?
he hadn't been running, but I could tell. But he definitely was.
Puffing like that?
Yeah, kind of. He looked disheveled a little bit, the hair, but
Yeah.
he wasn't sucking air, It was just the fact that he was acting so strange. That caught my eye.
Johnny, I have a question. You said that you heard some, you heard the police radio, or at least you
That was a
heard.
transistor radio you're talking about.
Can you recall approximately what time you heard that? I mean,
No,
okay.
no. It was whenever the president was shot. What was that?
12:30.
12:30. It was probably a little after 1:15 maybe. 45 minutes or so.
Well, I know in most of the affidavits and things that I've read over the past 40-some years, we pinpointed that down to about 12:44. About 12:44 is when the all points bulletin went out to the Dallas police, and first of all gave the description kind of almost exactly what you said.
Right.
And I've tried to go back and try to figure out who gave that description.
Yeah.
We have no idea who gave that description.
I don't know. I was listening. I think it was WFAA radio.
Okay.
Whoever was, I don't know if it was network or the local that was announcing that description. I'm assuming it was local.
Yeah. I would bet in the 60s, I bet at the newsroom, they had a police scanner,
Sure.
and they probably broadcast it as soon as it came out over the airwaves. So that's about how, I would bet that's how he heard that.
Yeah, but who came up with that description?
Yeah, that's a good
That's
point.
Well,
a good question. Because from the window, you could not have
No.
told somebody's height.
I think it came actually from a witness to the Tippett shooting. There were several actually witnesses to the Tippett shooting.
But I don't think they
And
did
somebody
that.
got on the radio there, Officer Tippett's vehicle, and but I don't know whether at that time he gave a description. I really don't know where it came from.
Well, no, it couldn't have been that because the description went out before Tippett was shot.
Yeah, because basically.
12:44.
I think they had done the review of who all was there, who wasn't there, and he was missing, and they threw out that description.
Right, at 12:44, the all points bullet, the APB went out.
Right.
However, the earliest description given by an eyewitness was at 12:52. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, so you have a discrepancy of about 8 minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there going, okay, you've got a clock in Dealey Plaza, you have an eyewitness there, and I'm sitting there going, geez, are you guys on time with anything?
Right.
But if it goes out at 12:44, I'm wondering who gave it, because the closest eyewitness gave it at
Well,
12:52.
if I could correct you, because you know I did my thesis on the Tippett killing. At 1:10 or 1:15 after Tippett was shot, one of the witnesses got on the police radio and said, "There's a police officer been shot."
Benavides, sure.
Right, and then whoever was on the radio couldn't figure out how to work it again.
Sure.
Another person got in the car and said a police officer had been shot, and then they heard a description because somebody said Signal 99, 10th and Patton, here's a description.
Sure,
So that's,
110,
I
112,
would bet that's how the radio got that.
I would say you're correct on that, but we do have an all points bulletin going
Right.
out at
Oh, it's 12:44. Right.
And then the closest eyewitness to the murder in Dealey Plaza
Was Brennan.
was Brennan,
Right.
who gave a description at 12:52.
Yeah, this guy was half blind, so sure, that's a
12:52
good.
to 12:44. So who gave the description at 12:44?
Yeah.
Which matches the same description
Well, and-
as Benavides and also
Exactly.
what you heard.
And like Mr. Brewer said, the description, he wouldn't have based it on that anyway, because that would have fit 2/3 of the population. White, 5'9", medium build. I mean, what are you looking for?
Yeah, in retrospect, it had nothing really to do with his description that caught my attention. It was the way he acted
Sure.
when he walked.
Yeah.
But no, I can't say that at all caught my attention because of his description.
Of course, I do remember too, at 12:44, they also said, gave the same type description, 160, 5'8", 5'9", white, male.
Carrying a
carrying
30-30 lever, 30-30 lever action
30-30
rifle.
lever action rifle. I'm going, wow.
Where do you get that?
Does everybody walk around Dallas with a rifle?
Last I heard, it was a bolt
Hey,
action.
well,
how you guys doing?
Carcano, you know.
Even if it was an orange giraffe, a guy walking around with a 30-30 caliber, I go, that's probably the guy I need to talk to. That's just speculating. I'm just spitballing
I've
here.
never heard the,
Yeah.
It's on the police radio.
the
What else? Question. Come on, folks. Material witness here. Your chance to be detectives. Come on. What would you ask Mr. Brewer if you were in a court of law about what he saw, what he just described to you? What would you want to know?
Well, just in case you don't know what to ask, Mr. Brewer brought these papers with us, okay? And he's going to give each one of you, he's autographed each one of these. Let me just tell you what these are, okay? This is affidavit, in fact, that he gave to the Dallas police on November 22nd, 1963, of the same thing he just basically described us. He's autographed that. This is the official affidavit that he, so.
I want one too.
Well, not the official, but I mean, yes. A copy of the reasonable facsimile thereof.
Johnny, hang on, did they take you down to the police station and make you do that affidavit?
They didn't take me down there. They called me and asked me if I would come down and meet them.
Later.
Yeah, I think it was in December, January. Something like
Really?
that. It was, I don't know what it was.
That's a long time to wait
But yeah, I
between
drove down. And,
observation and affidavit.
will it be? The date will be on.
Yeah, the date's on here.
What day was it? Look at the bottom where the signature would be. That's the date.
The 6th day of December.
So that's a week and a half later.
Yeah, week and a half later.
Memories can fade in a week and a half. That's interesting that they would wait that long to get him to talk, get his information.
But he brought these in. Every one of these are signed. This is from J. Lee Rankin, the general counsel. And when he appeared before the Warren Commission to give his testimony that he just said. And then also a letter given to him by the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, saying basically, I've learned part that you played in the capture of the accused slayer of our late President John F. Kennedy is with feelings deep pride that I commend you for your bravery in saying that this young man did his service to his country. So he brought all these in, signed them for you guys, and you guys will have a copy of each one of these. All right?
The President of the United States probably doesn't spend a lot of time writing letters to a citizen of the United States of America. He's got one of them. He's like the Medal of Honor winner. There's not too many of those folks that would have that.
Well, I found out how that letter came to pass. Albert Gore Sr. was a senator from Tennessee. I've got the letter that he shot over to Lyndon Johnson saying that he felt this man probably would need or could use some recognition or something.
Wow.
So that's how the letter was instigated from Al
Great.
Gore's dad, Albert Gore Sr.
Wow. Anything else?
I've got a wall full of stuff.
We need to come out to your place and take a look at some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Let me know.
Road trip. Road trip.
I'm going back right now.
Anything else?
About 3 hours should be
I
there.
want to ask
Yeah,
the
go.
kids a question. How many of you, this is not a scientific survey or anything, but how many of you, if you had been in Mr. Brewer's place that day, would have felt like you know, I need to tell somebody, I need to call the police and tell them that I saw a suspicious guy outside my store? Or would you say, oh my God, I don't want anything to do with this, and just go back in your store and, you know, not say anybody, not do anything? Raise your hand if you would have called the police.
I would have called the police. I wouldn't have followed anybody. No way. I'll keep an eye on him. I'll be a great witness, but I'm not following
He
him.
not only called the police, but he went in the theater
Trying to find him.
and tried to find the guy.
Not too many people do that.
I didn't know he had
Yeah,
Well, yeah, right.
I do that all the time when I was standing in the hall. I said, oh God, there's a fight breaking out. Harmer's there, she'll take care of it.
I don't-
So how many of you would
How
have
many
just
of you would
stayed
do
in the
that?
store and not done anything? Really? Yeah. I mean,
I wouldn't
that's a
have.
scary situation.
Yeah.
I think you did it without realizing what you were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd call the cops. I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have. Yes, ma'am. Right back there.
Question here,
Go.
guys.
Go.
Pretty much you just followed him because you were suspicious of like his actions. Like you didn't go by description. Did you go by description, or were you just like? this
Just his
is very
actions.
odd?
Yeah, just his actions. The description really did not grab me.
didn't know
It was
who it was?
just the fact that he was acting and looking over shoulders when the police cars went by, and also the fact that I had seen him before somewhere. I knew that I'd seen him, you know. And when you're in sales, you remember faces and names, you know. And it took a long time for it to be proven to me that that's. I mean, I could tell somebody, yeah, I've seen him before. He was a customer. And they say, okay, yeah, right. But when I got a copy of the shoes that he was wearing when Ruby shot him, and it clearly states and shows that those are that confirmed in my mind, you know, that,
He only followed him because of his actions, not based on anything else.
totally on his actions. Yeah.
So it must have been something to stand out in a civilian's mind that this is not right. You know, we all have that sixth sense. Actually, we have seven senses.
Right. Just said right.
Yeah, there's something wrong here. But the back of my neck would have been, call the cops. I ain't getting involved.
Well, you know what
I wouldn't. I know, but I still wouldn't have followed the guy.
What generally happens is that you don't do anything. And then later, when you see
Yo,
the guy on
I
TV,
wish I
you
would've
say,
said something.
oh, that's the guy that walked right in front of my
Exactly.
store. I thought he was acting funny.
Yeah.
But you don't meet very many people that take action like
No.
Mr. Brewer.
I was totally having second thoughts even when I was behind him until the lights came on and Oswald stood up. I said, well, at least I know
Yeah.
somebody's here. And then later it
What's
turned
that?
out to be a good call.
Yeah, you'd seen him as a customer. Yeah, I waited on him as a customer. Oh. You don't remember how much time when you waited on him as a customer until the 22nd? Was it month, 2 months?
In that neighborhood, I
Okay.
would say.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know.
I don't think I would have remembered.
Maybe just the
Faces.
face, or, you know. I
Yeah.
remember
Well,
the face.
you said that he was such
he
a
was, yeah, he was not somebody you would enjoy
over a
being
$4
around.
pair of shoes.
$4.70.
$4.70. The guy was wanting. Oh my God.
$4.70, you know, but he was just really, really, really annoying.
Wow.
Very fastidious. And maybe he was sweating on
And was he by himself when he was in the store? Okay. You know, he's married with 2 children. Well, no, he only had
Marina
one
was,
children at the time.
Marina was out in Irving, I guess, at the time.
Okay.
And he had moved into
What,
McClelland.
I know was a good question. Middle of the day,
Yeah.
evening, morning, what time was he in the store?
I'm gonna say early evening because, shoot, I don't know. I would say between 5 and
Was it a weekday,
7,
weekend?
Weekday, I'm pretty sure.
5 o'clock,
After work.
after work. Wonder how he got there. Did you see him drive up on a car?
He ran.
No.
Oswald didn't have a car, didn't have a driver's license, but yet he's in Oak Cliff looking at shoes. Maybe he took the bus.
But where he was staying was only
Right.
a few blocks
7 blocks away,
Yeah,
right.
something like that. So
Yeah. Was you the only shoe store in town?
More than they do now.
Do what?
That was nothing to walk.
Sure.
Only way
Yeah.
to walk shoes.
Yeah.
people used to walk.
People used to walk, yes.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else have a question? We have an opportunity that is unique among you guys as a student because you are the only students that have ever met and had Mr. Brewer talk to you, because we just met him last year. Casey and I just happened to run across him when Clint Hill and Jerry Blaine were in Dallas, Texas to promote their book. And did you walk up to him and say, that's Johnny Brewer? I go, holy crap, that's Johnny Brewer.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
Our Johnny Brewer.
Somebody says, would you like to meet Johnny Brewer? And I go, Johnny Brewer?
I thought he was
Where?
dead.
He's right over here. And I go,
Wow.
Johnny Brewer? Okay. For researchers, it's a little different. So.
It's like Rockstar, you know.
Rockstar, man.
Wow. But he was kind enough to give us half hour or more of a time in November and then agreed to come and visit you. You guys have the unique opportunity that nobody else will have. So please thank Mr. Brewer for coming.